1865, but the nation was still torn apart and needed a strong leader to put it back together. If anyone was able to fulfill that role, it was Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson was flung into the office of president. Johnson was a Southern Democrat and wanted to reconcile the Southern states with the Union quickly and mercifully. He intended to carry out what Lincoln said in his second inaugural address: with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. This was no easy task. The House of Representatives was 2/3 Republican. The Senate was over 3/4 Republican and strongly opposed Johnson. Cooperation between the legislative branch and the executive branch was non-existent. Congress and Johnson had very different ideas regarding Reconstruction. The legislative branch was tired of dealing with Johnson and decided that the only way to accomplish what they wanted was to rid themselves of the one man who stood in their way. On February 24th, 1868, the House of Representatives voted to impeach Johnson, and the trial was brought before the Senate. Johnson was acquitted by 1 vote. The deciding vote was made by a Republican senator from Kansas named Edmund G. Ross. I received a telegram yesterday saying, "Kansas has heard the evidence and demands the conviction of the president." Signed, D.R. Anthony, and $1,000. To D.R. Anthony and $1,000. I do not recognize your right to demand that I vote either for or against conviction. I have taken an oath to do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws, and trust that I shall have the courage to vote according to the dictates of my judgment, and for the highest good of the country. I received a reply from Mr. Anthony. "Kansas repudiates you, as she does all perjurers and skunks." Why, thank you, Mr. Anthony. It is such a comforting thought to know that my home state holds me in such high esteem. I fear that this is only the beginning of the criticism that I must endure for the sake of my conscience. I have not even voted for acquittal, and I am already treated as if I have committed a crime. Tomorrow is the vote. I intend to give the president as fair a trial as an accused man ever had on this earth. It is done with. The galleries were packed. Tickets of admission were at an enormous premium. The House had adjourned, and all of its members were in the Senate chamber. Every chair on the Senate floor was filled with a senator, a cabinet officer, a member of the President's Council, or a member of the House. President Johnson was not present. Finally, the roll was started at 12:15. By the time my name was called, the vote was 24 guilty to 12 not guilty. 36 votes were needed for conviction, and 11 more were almost certain. My vote was to be the deciding one. All was silent in the chamber. I almost literally looked down into my open grave. Nevertheless, I voted not guilty. The president was acquitted. If you want to know the popular opinion, all you need do is read the newspapers. They are full of it. On Saturday last, Edmund G. Ross, United States Senator from Kansas, sold himself and betrayed his constituents, stultified his own record, basely lied to his friends, shamefully violated his solemn pledge, and to the utmost of his poor ability signed the death warrant of his country's liberty. This act was done deliberately because the traitor, like Benedict Arnold, loved money better than he did principle, friends, honor, and his country all combined. Poor, pitiful, shriveled wretch, with a soul so small that a little pelf would outweigh all things else that dignify or ennoble manhood. Benedict Arnold, which a strange body part of mine would have buried. Millions of men, cursing me today, will bless me tomorrow for having saved the country from the greatest peril through which it has ever passed, though none but God can ever know the struggle it has cost me. I am confident with my vote, regardless of what may come of it. The articles of impeachment were put to the test and failed. They failed because they proved nothing. Failed because not a single allegation of the entire indictment was or could be proven or tortured into an impeachable offense. As a matter of fact, there would have been no impeachment, either of Mr. Lincoln had he lived, or of Mr. Johnson after him. Conditions may arise when the exercise of impeaching and removing the president may be as essential to preserving our political system as it threatened, in this instance, to destroy that system. Should that day ever come, it is to be hoped that the remedy of impeachment, as established by the Constitution, may be as patriotically, as fearlessly, and as unselfishly applied as it was in this instance rejected. Johnson's acquittal was a narrow escape from what would have been a dangerous turning point in our nation's history. In the words of Lyman Trumbull, an Illinois senator who also voted for acquittal, "Once set the example of impeaching the president, no future president will be safe who happens to differ with the majority of the House and 2/3 of the Senate on any measure deemed by them important, particularly if of political character. Blinded by partisan zeal with such an example before them, they will not scruple to remove out of the way any obstacle to the accomplishment of their purposes. And what then becomes of the checks and balances of the Constitution, so carefully devised and so vital to its perpetuity? They are all gone. Neither Ross nor any of the other Republicans who voted for acquittal were ever reelected to the Senate. He was blackmailed and socially ostracized, but because of Ross's sacrifice and courage, the executive branch remains strong. Impeachment is not common. It has occurred only one other time in the history of the United States, when Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998. Because Johnson was not removed from office, the system of checks and balances in the Constitution was preserved. In John F. Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage, he asks, "But who might Edmund G. Ross have been?" That is the question for Ross, a man with an excellent command of words, an excellent background for politics, and an excellent future in the Senate, might well have outstripped his colleagues in prestige and power throughout a long Senate career. Instead, he chose to throw all of this away for one act of conscience. Our country needs politicians like Ross, who are willing to stand up for what is just, rather than what is politically expedient.